Welcome to Narrative Responsibility, a podcast about examining the meta-story of your life, how well it is serving you, and how to change it for the better. I'm Elena Wolf, relationship coach and life alignment mentor, and this is this week's New Perspective. Hi there. I'm so glad you're here today. This is episode 35. Sober Curious. So the topic of sobriety or abstention seemed to be a reasonable follow-up to comfort eating, which is what I have been talking about the last couple weeks. This episode is going to be more personal story time and some observations that I made that came out of my own experience of testing out sobriety. So this is more just some questions to ask yourself or perspective lenses to look through. I'm not trying to preach anything or even necessarily offer anything prescriptive behavior-wise, just to kind of share my experience and let that hit you however it might. For the past 18 months or so, I have been mostly sober. Specifically, I am using that term with respect to alcohol because I've never regularly used illicit substances, but I know some people also consider caffeine to be a mind-altering substance. I mean, it is, but you know, when some people talk about being sober, they also include caffeine. I am not. I definitely still have caffeine on a daily basis. And I will also say that my alcohol use didn't really feel disordered or like any kind of problem because of my life circumstances and my age. I was having a couple drinks, maybe once a month. So, you know, it really was not something that I was using on a regular basis or had built a lifestyle around. Certainly, I don't feel like I was flirting with any kind of addiction or something like that. It was a genuine social drinking use and not every time that I socialized. And honestly, that's where my alcohol use had been for years. I'm basically since I got pregnant with my son. I mean, well, obviously I didn't drink while I was pregnant, but then even once he was born, and I stopped breastfeeding, that's kind of like where things were. It just wasn't a big part of my lifestyle other than maybe for a weekend event or something, I might drink more days in a row than otherwise. So yeah, so it wasn't something that felt out of line or like out of control or out of the ordinary. But I had noticed over about the last 3 years that I was getting more physical repercussions to drinking than I had been. So basically, I was getting a worse aftermath for drinking the same amount that I always had. And then I found that if I drank less, I was still getting the same level of, I don't know if hangover is exactly the right word, but, you know, physical distress the next day. And when it got to the point that I was having a reaction to one drink, I realized that this might actually be metabolic more than something like dehydration or like overstimulation or something like that. And that was the point where I decided, okay, I need to explore sobriety while I am still at a point that it's unpleasant, but not like unworkable to have an aftermath from one drink, because if I slip up or if I realize that I don't have the capacity to truly be sober right now, then I'm going to have that knowledge to build the skills while I still can, as opposed to being in this position where I have to be sober because the consequences of having anything are really high, but I don't know how to be sober. So it just felt more aligned to me to experiment with sobriety while I still had control of all the variables rather than being forced into it for a medical reason, which seemed like it was coming at me. Part of my reason for wanting to kind of do this soft launch into sobriety is that I had more than 20 years of using alcohol. And that means that I had 20 plus years of associations with it in certain contexts and 20 plus years of leaning on it for certain tasks. And I had a lot of friendships where alcohol was normally consumed when we were socializing. And also, just generally speaking, living in America in the 2020s, there is a lot of alcohol use in our social rituals and our just kind of general cultural expectations. I mean, the whole reason the current trend of mocktails and sober bars is even a thing is because of how deeply our culture has entrenched alcohol use. And it's in so many of our social rituals. Hey, let's just go get a drink, or really centered in a lot of our third spaces. I don't know if you know the concept of third spaces. I don't think I've talked about it on this podcast before, but it's basically a space besides home or work that we can go to. And a lot of people have either church or a bar, and those are really kind of the only third spaces available. So just the pervasiveness of drinking alcohol in our culture is also something that, as an adult person who has been living as an adult for 20 plus years, that I knew there would be a lot of associations with drinking for me. So I figured that I would, in fact, be likely to slip up a few times on my way to being truly alcohol-free if that was an end place that I did need to go. So having an experiment, well, let's just see how this goes, really felt a lot more doable for me than having a strictly enforced, okay, well, I'm just going to cold turkey it, I'm never drinking again, kind of decision. In terms of the metrics, I went 10 months entirely sober, and then I made a very deliberate decision to experiment with alcohol a couple times during the holidays. So the first was right before Thanksgiving, and then over Christmas. And in the months since then, so this is June of 2024 as I'm recording this, I've had a couple other experiments. And so maybe like 5 or 6 times in the past, really like I guess the past 8 months, or you could also say in the past 18 months, I have had any kind of alcoholic drink whatsoever. And I'll talk more about what happened in the end. I just kind of wanted to share those statistics up front to frame my observations and the experiences that I've had in your mind, so that you kind of know what timeline this is over, and therefore maybe get a sense of how many opportunities I had where I was either tempted or invited to drink that I did choose not to. And just for you to get a sense of where I'm coming from with what I'm saying. It's not like, oh, I've been doing this a month and it's changed my life. It's something that I've been at for a while and have had time to observe patterns around. So what are some of the patterns that I've seen, or some of the insights that I've had as a result of this experiment? Well, the first thing that actually really surprised me is how easy I found it in the end to resist drinking. I feel like this is because my choice to stop drinking was very much body-led rather than like an egoic decision I was trying to force on myself. So bottom up as opposed to top down kind of thinking. Basically, hangovers after you're 35 are awful, and they were getting worse every time. And it was a punishment disproportionate to the crime. And my body made its desire to not experience that ever again very clear to me. So there was this emotional and almost like physical motivation to maintain my sobriety, to stick with this experiment. And that actually made it a lot easier to follow than I expected. Like, I expected to slip. And I can actually say that I didn't. I went through all of the worst temptations. I went through a massive heartbreak. I went through going to a costume con with all of my friends where we typically do a lot of drinking, and they were certainly all doing a lot of drinking. I went through a friend's engagement party. I went through multiple family gathering type things. So kind of all of the places that I expected to really fail in the experiment, to have a moment where I just was like, I need a drink and I'm going to do it. I can't not do this right now. I actually got through. And part of what helped was my body not wanting to. Sobriety felt like a gift. It felt like I was finally listening to my body and giving it what it needed. And it was just so much relief and gratitude from my body for not drinking. And any of the times that I was kind of faced with temptation, even when part of me really wanted to, there was also this other part of me feeling an intense, like visceral revulsion at the thought. So I had basically a stronger motivation to avoid drinking and the consequences that would come with it than I did a motivation to indulge. I will say that I deliberately reinforced the good decisions that I was making, in the sense that if I had had a temptation, at say a social event the night before, the next morning, I would stop and do a physical inventory and think about whether I was glad or regretful about my choice to not drink. And without fail, every single time I felt this flood of relief, like, thank God I'm not hungover. I might be tired. I might be in kind of a hermit mode where I did too much socializing and overextended my energy a little bit last night and I need a break day. But it was like, hey, I feel good. I feel rested. I feel ready to go work on a project or do something that would be like really actively renewing, like this concept of active rest. I can really engage with something that's going to feel good and make me ready for the week ahead, as opposed to basically having to spend the whole day being sick. So there was also that positive reinforcement where I made a point to link how good I felt to the good decision to not have alcohol the night before. And I will be honest that process of, I guess, that gratitude process of thanking myself for that good decision, of checking in with my body and reinforcing that it had been the right decision, is part of why I was able to maintain my sobriety for 10 months, because I did have times that I felt tempted. There were times that I made the decision not to drink fairly easily, but that is not to say that it was without any conflict or without any sense of regret or like I was going to miss out on something. I mean, there were times that it was simply kind of missing the sensory deliciousness. I stopped drinking things that I don't find delightful years ago. So, sometimes I just missed the flavors of a certain cocktail or a certain liquor or, a certain type of cider or beer or something like that. And there were times that my taste buds were really craving that, and choosing sobriety felt like I was denying myself a treat and a sensory joy. Again, it wasn't that it was all that much of a struggle to make the choice to stay sober, but there was some conflict. It felt like a bit of self-denial. And, there were times that I know I had less fun because I stayed sober when my companions were having alcohol. some of those times I was just not able to kind of shake my inhibitions and really be totally fun and carefree. And there were other times that I got really tired and overloaded with sensory input, and I had to leave early because I was not using alcohol to dull the sharp edges of overstimulation. And so choosing sobriety in those times kind of felt like choosing my physical well being over my emotional or experiential well being. Like, it was maybe the right choice overall, but I was still closing myself off to an experience of joy and play and fun and excitement that I could have had if I had chosen to have a drink and kind of take that edge off. Which brings me to the observation around what alcohol was in fact doing for me. I hadn't consciously realized, because I had either never or rarely been in that kind of social context, a big event like a convention or a concert, and not had at least a couple drinks. The main thing that I found I was using alcohol to do was to tone down my sensory input. I have a very sensitive body, a very sensitive nervous system. I notice everything, and if I am not somewhat dissociating from my body, then input and emotions can hit me really strongly. I have an overload point that is much lower than the average person's. And going past that threshold is intensely uncomfortable. Once I am past my input capacity, everything is too loud and too bright and too chaotic. I can't make sense of it anymore, and it's really, the world starts to feel threatening, and my sort of nerves start to burn and I get jumpy, and I just need to get away. I need to get to somewhere that is calm, where I can breathe, where I can escape from this bombardment. It's what it feels like, this bombardment of sensory input. So my choices, once I am at or past that threshold of capacity, are to numb out my awareness or to leave. And while, yes, I can dissociate from my body a little bit, what tends to happen when I do it is that I get silent and weird, and I stop being present to what's happening anyway. So if the point is that I'm wanting to stay with my friends and keep having fun, that's not what happens if I numb out by dissociating. So really, there's not a whole lot of point in staying. Alcohol was a tool that I used to blunt those sensory perceptions enough that I could stay there, that I could stay in a context like that, a very stimulating social and environmental context, past my normal capacity, and actually stay present to it and still continue to have fun. So for me, choosing to attend to my body's signals of, hey, we're at our limit, hey, this is too much, kind of meant that I was brought face to face with my own sensitivity and the limits that I actually have for experiencing. My limits for participating and being present are a lot lower than I had thought they were, because before I had always been artificially extending them with drinks. So that was super annoying and kind of sad to realize. But it did make it clear to me that, okay, I was using alcohol in these contexts for a reason, and for kind of legitimately as a tool to cope with this environment. And I don't know, I guess it just kind of underscored the point that when it comes to our coping mechanisms, they are serving a purpose. We might not be aware of it. I had not consciously understood how distressing I found excess sensory input until I took away the possibility of blunting it. And I hadn't really understood how much lower my limits were than the average person's, or what I thought, until I took away this ability to artificially extend them for a time. Another thing that I discovered I was using alcohol for was to help me have fun. Basically, to help me get out of my head and out of all of my thoughts and complexities and just be in my body and be in the present moment. I mean, if you've been listening to this podcast, obviously you have some sense at this point of how much I carry around in my head, like how complicated I tend to make things, how analytical I am, how observant I am, and how I'm constantly like questioning everything and looking at stuff from a million different perspectives. And you know what? Sometimes that's awesome and it makes me feel alive and on fire and like some kind of, I don't know, arcane existential wizard. But sometimes it's like, why can't I just let it go and go have fun? So if I took alcohol away, I had to acknowledge to myself that I'm actually kind of bad at having fun. I'm actually kind of bad at just letting go and being in the moment. I'm not maybe a very fun person when I am left to my own devices. So that was something I realized. And I also realized how often that I was using alcohol to just get a break from myself. Not even necessarily in company, but times when I would just sit on my back porch looking at the stars, listening to music, having a drink. Like that really gave me a nice break from my thoughts, from my emotions, from a sense of seriousness, existential seriousness about the world. And then also I realized that there were times I wanted a drink because I was trying to get into my emotions and was kind of blocked from it and thought that might help me to get to them. So, you know, it's a tool that I was using sometimes to block me from my emotions and then sometimes to access my emotions. And that meant that I had to find other ways to break through whatever block I was putting up. If I was not like consciously, but just, you know, on a subconscious level trying to avoid feeling something, then if I couldn't use alcohol to kind of break down that egoic resistance, I had to find some other way to do it. And similarly, if I was feeling overwhelmed by my emotions or just kind of exhausted and like I can't process anymore, I need a break, I had to find some other way to get myself out of that headspace and just get a break for a while. If you listen to my episodes on comfort eating, then you know that our coping mechanisms are often covering up for a lack of skill. There is some kind of skill that we need to develop, but we haven't had a chance to do it, or we don't know what that skill is, or we don't know how to develop it, or, you know, we've been using this coping mechanism so long, we don't even recognize that we need that skill. So one of the principles that I held myself to during this experiment was to deliberately not give in to the temptation to drink if I was feeling a sense of distress or something like that. That I really wanted to take the opportunity to inventory the places I needed to develop more skills and more tools, basically to see what am I using alcohol for, so that I can help solve this problem in a different way, so that I can find other tools that solve the same problem. You know, aside from the fact that I might hit a point where I cannot drink alcohol, whether I would choose it or not, I also really wanted to make it a choice where it wasn't something that I defaulted to because I had no other tool for handling that issue, but rather something that, okay, I have 5 tools. Which one do I choose to use? Which one do I want to use? I want it to be a choice, not kind of a default cope. So when did I decide that it was appropriate to break sobriety, and why? The first was an experiment to see what happened if I had a drink right before Thanksgiving, and I was in a good spot. I was feeling emotionally well. I was rested. And I think I'd actually had gotten the very end of a bottle out because I was making oatmeal raisin cookies. And just as a side note, soak those raisins in rum first for about 45 minutes. It will take your cookies next level. Oh my God. It's really not the same without it. So it is a must do step. Anyway, I decided, okay, let me just make a drink, because there was no point in pouring like raisiny rum back in the bottle. That was going to be gross, right? So I had a nice little cocktail and enjoyed the heck out of it and felt awful the next day. So I was like, okay, this might be this might be a thing where I have one drink and my head feels like it's being split in two the next day, and this is just not gonna work. I'll try it one more time. So at Christmas, because one of my traditions and also, actual rituals involves making wassail, I did have my usual alcoholic wassail. And in that context, I didn't wake up with any kind of adverse reaction the next day. So that kind of left me in this space of uncertainty where it's like, okay, not every single time I have alcohol does it end badly. So I don't need to have this just kind of blanket ban where I just never drink it at all because it never ends well. But also, I can't drink it without having evaluated whether I had the time and the space in my schedule the next day to be hungover, because clearly there's like a 50-50 chance. Therefore, I'm not going to risk drinking if I have any plans for the following day, or if I need my own full presence for a project or some other kind of competency the next day. And that's kind of where I've left things with myself. So in the time since Christmas, so the last 6 months, I have had a couple social events where I chose to drink either like very watered down wine or like a glass of wine just to kind of see what happened. And in one case, I woke up fine the next day, and in the other, I felt like crap the next day. So again, kind of that 50-50 chance. It's, feels kind of dicey. It's really got to be worth it. And I've really got to have a clear schedule the next day. And there was one time where I was so desperate for a break from myself that I decided the hangover was worth it if that happened. And I had probably an entire bottle of wine with friends because there were 3 of us and we ended up killing 2. And weirdly, that time I did not have any consequences, maybe because it was over like a 4-hour period and we were drinking a lot of water and laughing a lot, and it was just like really good. And it was, in fact, the medicine that my soul needed. It let me put down this sort of crushing existential despair that had been hanging over me for a couple days and actually enjoy something and actually feel alive in a good way. So, I mean, even if I'd been hungover, I think it would have been worth it, but I didn't have one, and that was nice. My other thought about why that time in particular I didn't suffer consequences is because it was after I had fully anchored my eating patterns in the glucose goddess method. And so if the really adverse reactions I had been having were metabolic, it's possible that changing my eating patterns and having sustained that for several months when I had that kind of breakdown night might have also made a difference in how the alcohol interacted with me metabolically. So maybe that was a problem and it has been resolved, or maybe it was just a good night and the gods were kind. Who's to say? So, at least for now, I am choosing to keep alcohol in my toolbox, but it kind of has to be for the rare times that it is the best tool for the job and one where I'm not going to mind the consequences if they come. So before I wrap up for the day, there are also some general observations I want to make about this time of having been deliberately sober. First, alcohol is everywhere in American culture. I am not sure that I have been to a social gathering in the last 18 months that did not have it on offer. It's pervasive, and I don't think that enough of us recognize how much of our socializing is kind of built around alcohol. Like, let's go out to, the street fair and have drinks and get a buzz while we walk around and look at stuff and laugh with each other. Or let's go, to the local open mic night and have a few beers, and let's go to this concert, or let's go to this convention, or let's, go to dinner and have a few drinks. Like, it's so common. And that makes it hard sometimes to feel like you can properly socialize if you are really tempted to have drinks when other people are drinking or inviting you to drink. So the second thing that I noticed is the way you refuse to engage in alcohol in a social context matters. It matters a lot. The times that I said, I don't want to drink tonight, I don't feel like drinking, I feel tired, I don't want to be hungover, I have something I have to do tomorrow. When I phrased it that way, which is, self-care, boundaries, self-nurturing, knowing what I want for myself, and feeling like I'm making a clear choice to support what I want and need for myself, those were often met with just at least a little bit of pushback, like, have one anyway, or just have one, or something like that. But if I said, no, thank you, I'm sober, like, people listened to that. They heard that phrasing and they're like, oh, this is like an addiction issue, and I really need to be supportive because I don't want it on my conscience that, they fell off and wrecked their life. So that's a good tool to kind of keep in your back pocket if somebody's trying to push you a little bit. No, go ahead, have a drink, just have one, just, I'm sober. And it changes the tone, it changes the conversation. Another thing that I've learned is, because I have so many years of practice of being in social situations with a drink in my hand, if I have a drink of something in my hand, then I kind of get that same feeling. It doesn't actually have to be alcoholic to give me that feeling anymore. So this is using all of my emotional and somatic associations with it to help me. Soda water with lime is indistinguishable from vodka soda to anyone looking at you. So you might look like you're participating in the social ritual of drinking alcohol. So therefore you're not being hassled about it. And also having that, bubbly little drink in your hand can make you feel like you're participating in it, even if you're not. So, that was really helpful. And if you are really missing the taste, but determined to maintain your sobriety, I have found some pretty decent non-alcoholic beers exist, and some pretty decent non-alcoholic wines exist. Those are specifically things that were made and processed like beer or wine and then had the alcohol removed, as opposed to things that are naturally non-alcoholic. So if there's something about the specific taste of beer or wine that you miss, or that's what you're wanting, those are options. That technology has come a long way. And if you ask your friends to support you in being sober, particularly if you have established this like before an event, then that's really going to help a lot. They'll make sure that there are supplies for you, and they will be offering you the non-alcoholic options as opposed to making you say out loud, I don't want to drink alcohol tonight. So that way you're not being presented with a temptation that you have to deny. You have friends who are presenting you with the option that you pre-chose in advance without having to really make that choice again in the moment. And that's often easier too, because then you're not feeling the pressure of other people around you drinking. You're not feeling the pressure of the associations, with the environment and the context and I'm just going to give in and have fun. So having friends that can support you and that kind of know in advance what you might need, also hugely helpful. For me, making the time and the space in my life to explore being sober and really get a handle on my triggers for why I wanted to drink and the contexts where it was most difficult for me not to drink was hugely helpful. I really feel a lot of confidence in myself that if I needed to go sober, whether for my own medical reasons or if I ended up with a partner who needed complete sobriety in our household for any reason, I could do it. It wouldn't be that hard for me. And that feels like a position of power to know that I truly could take it or leave it. And I like that I have the choice to keep it in my toolbox. I hope that continues, to be determined. I'm kind of going to let the interplay of additional experiments, again, when it's the right time, and that is the right tool, kind of guide me on that. If it gets to a point where the batting average becomes 4 out of 5 times it ends badly, then maybe I just decommission that tool for good. We'll see. So, I don't know. I feel like as kind of a broad summary point, if you do drink alcohol or honestly use some other substance like marijuana kind of in these same ways that I've been describing why I was using alcohol, examining your reasons for why you say yes to it or why you default to it is a really good way to shine a light on places that you might be lacking in skills, or places where you might need to make some changes in your life. This is kind of going back to last week where I was talking about the different phases of breaking out of comfort eating. This would be like the phase 2 and phase 3 level stuff. How can I examine where I need to build skills, where I need to add additional tools, additional coping mechanisms so that this becomes a choice for me? So if you can look at your choice to reach for alcohol as a symptom, then there's a really natural question that follows, which is a symptom of what? And when you can see that what clearly, then you can also usually find other ways to address it. And that creates empowerment, because at that point, we have a choice. We're able to choose what we do because we understand why we're doing it. Choosing to drink alcohol can be valid. It might be for pleasure. It might be for ritual. It might be because on some days it's just the least energetically expensive choice, and that makes it the right choice in the overall context of your week. I think that as long as it's not a habit that you're defaulting to without thought, nor the only tool that you can use for the job, then sometimes you can validly use it as the best tool for the job. And I do believe that even moderate or occasional drinkers can benefit from being sober curious and experimenting with what happens, what gets revealed if you take that tool out of your toolbox for a while and just see. So I hope that you have enjoyed hearing about my journey and my experimenting with sobriety. I hope this didn't come off as too preachy, because that's not my intent. I don't ever want to preach one particular way of living as the way. Rather, I just want to espouse the principle of being deliberate in how we live, being deliberate about the choices we make. In other words, taking responsibility for the narrative of our life and the way that that story is playing out. So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you want to know more about my work as a coach, you can check out thepatternbreaker.com. You can follow my Instagram at thepatternbreaker. Check out my Patreon, patreon.com/narrative responsibility. And until next time, what part of your story are you going to take responsibility for this week?